imagine that they might have not met, but actually been on the same street at the same time.
Yeah, that was a point, that was like the only point during the process of writing that book that was actually a moment of inspiration. It was just a lot of hard work and research, but one day this image came into my head of, okay, what if these two people met? You know, Virginia Woolf lived here on this square in London, and Donald Winnicott was living in London, and he was in analysis, and his analyst was in the next square. And I just, imagining them in London together at the same time somehow brought the book to life for me.
And also, there's this fact that and you show Virginia Woolf walking her dog and Winnicott passing by in the background. It's once again reminiscent of that theme in that first autobiographical story, where you're going past and there's other people in the background, and something very important happens to Virginia Woolf, because all of a sudden she gets the whole plot to a novel.
Yeah, to the lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was such an amazing story to me. In her memoirs, she writes about how one day walking in the park, the whole idea for her masterpiece, To the Lighthouse, just came to her, which was also the book that liberated her from her mother's psychic domination.
So I think it might be time to have some questions from the audience. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un pour faire passer le micro? Alors, est-ce qu'on a un micro pour les gens qui veulent poser des questions? Et est-ce qu'on a? Voilà.
Je vais le faire.
Est-ce que vous pouvez entendre l'anglais?
Yes.
Voilà,
Yes, I can hear you.
I want to ask in English, what happens when you reread yourself? Like after discovering so much of you, after doing Are You My Mother, when you reread Fun Home, what happens?
What happens is that I want to take my red pen and edit out a lot of excess words and fix all the drawing mistakes. That's basically what happens. You mean like, do I have any kind of different perspective on things or on my life?
Or even deconstructing yourself, like dismantling yourself when watching you tell a story, because even the way you tell the story in both books is somehow different, because you have changed, right? Do you feel it like, do you think it's strange for you to see another Alison there? Can you understand what I'm...
Yeah. Yes, but I feel like if I went too far with that type of thinking, I would just curl up into a fetal position and not be able to move ever again. That would be completely paralyzing. I'm already like recursive and self-reflexive enough, I think. I'm trying to move a little more in the other direction, out into the world, I hope.
But it might also be stimulating. You might think, oh, there's something here that I've maybe not said enough about, and maybe I might do something about it. Has that happened?
Yeah, I guess I can see areas of the story sometimes where I'm not being as honest. I can see that I wasn't being as honest as I could have been. I'm not thinking of any examples at the moment, but I can see where I was hiding something, you know? Thank you.
Oui, les questions, c'est toujours d'un bout à l'autre.
Bonsoir. Can you explain your test, Bechdel test?
Oh, the Bechdel test. Yes, I forgot to.
My bête noire.
Oh, because you're always asked about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to change my attitude. It's a good thing. But I'm much better known for the Bechdel test than for my work.
In fact, when I jotted down ideas and questions, the first thing I wrote was Bechdel test, and then I thought, no, I'm not going to mention it, because she must be asked that question all the time. But then again.
But no, it's a good thing. And it does come from my comic strip. It's not like, I guess the reason I'm uncomfortable with it is because it sounds like I made this test and I named it after myself. And that's not true. I didn't. I even stole the idea from a friend. It's not even my idea. And she stole it from Virginia Woolf. It's actually from A Room of One's Own.
Oh, yes.
The basic principle of like, why are there not more women protagonists in literature? Should I say what the Bechdel test is? Okay, so I wrote this comic strip in 1985, a Dykes to Watch Out For strip, where two women are trying to find a movie to go to. They're trying to decide what movie they will go see. And one of them says, well, I have a rule about movies. I can only see a movie that has at least two women in it who talk to each other about something besides a man. And those were surprisingly difficult criteria to meet. And the only movie she could see was Alien at the time, because the two women in it talked to each other about the monster. It's somehow, this was just a funny lesbian feminist cartoon that my friends and I enjoyed, and, we were, of course, that's what movies are like. But many years later, I guess film students kind of got a hold of this old comic strip. Film students were being taught that if you want to sell a script to Hollywood, don't have more than one woman in it. Don't let two women talk to each other, because everyone's just going to fall asleep. So some young feminist film students decided to get this Bechdel test thing going, and they started, evaluating movies about whether they passed the test or not. And the vast number of Hollywood movies do not pass the test. Okay.
What about non-Hollywood movies, like European or Asian or whatever?
No, Americans don't watch those movies. I don't really watch hardly any movies, so that's also why I feel sheepish talking about the test.
Une question.
Talking about your books, you talked about the way they were constructed, the structure, and a lot of sort of more rational things about them, but they must have been very intense emotional journeys as well. So, they're emotional to read. I'm not an easy person to cry, but there's that spread in Fun Home, where you are sitting in the car with your father, thinking, okay, the light is about to go green, I've got to tell him now, which I found particularly intense, really. Do you ever, maybe to echo the question you just heard from the other girl, but do you ever have moments when you read yourself in the books find them quite overwhelming, or have you had those moments, at least when you were writing them, having a good thought about a memory that kind of came to you and was just too much to handle?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, because I'm a person who has difficulty with emotion, and these books they're very cerebral books. They're very structured, as you say, with a lot of thought and rational energy going into telling the stories. But I'm always what I'm trying to get to is an emotional place. But the only way I can do it is through these ideas, through this mediation of the mind. I wish I could say that I was like sobbing all the time at my drawing board, but I don't. There are moments, you know, maybe not so much in the writing as just in the way I'm thinking and living during the period that I'm working on a book. When I was writing Fun Home, I did some exercises. I felt like I wasn't really in touch with my grief about my father, so I decided I would read poetry, because my father loved poetry and he was always trying to get me to read poems, and I would say, "Go, get away from me with that poetry, I can't stand it." So I got a big anthology of poetry, and every night for a couple of weeks I would open it at random to a poem, and I would read it out loud as if I were reading it to my father. And it was a surprisingly emotional experience. I would immediately start sobbing and immediately start like understanding poetry, understanding his love for poetry. And sometimes I'd open to a poem that I knew that he loved, and that was especially powerful. But that wasn't strictly part of my, you know, the book itself. It was sort of outside of the book, but it helped me to get at the feelings, which I always have trouble with.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Je me demandais en fait si vous aviez vu la série télé The L Word et si vous en aviez un avis, parce que quand j'ai découvert Dax to Watch Out For, c'est vraiment tout ce que je cherchais, que je n'ai pas trouvé dans The L Word, et si vous pensiez que ça avait un effet positif et quelles étaient les limites.
Oh, the L word?
Yeah.
Is that what you're... Okay. I didn't really watch much of the L word. I saw the first season. And then I didn't watch it after that. I found it sort of annoying. I guess because these characters were so kind of glamorous, and they seemed a little, you know, designed to bring heterosexual men into the audience, which they had to do, you know, people had to pay for that show, so they needed an audience. But I just felt sort of annoyed by it. And then if somebody showed me an academic, a lesbian academic that I know wrote a paper about all of the parallels between my comic strip and the L word, and apparently there are all these very similar situations, like similar things happened to the characters. And but I never saw it, so who knows?
But maybe those writers had been reading you.
Well, that's what she was implying. I don't know. I mean, maybe, you know, I don't think that was the case. I think just the fact that they're lesbian characters and they're living their lives, maybe that just seemed similar.
Et une autre chose sur Dax to Watch Out For, moi, j'ai lu que l'essentiel, mais dans le strip, la politique a une place très très importante qui revient sans arrêt. Et dans vos romans suivants, où vous vous concentrez sur l'intime, est-ce que vous pensez que les romans suivants sont quand même politiques ou que l'intime et la politique sont opposés?
You know, I feel like it's all the same project. I feel like the more intimate work that I'm doing now is still political in a way. It's not overt. It's not about current events. It's not about, you know, different stupid politicians. But it's about the dynamics of oppression and liberation inside of us, you know? I guess Dykes to Watch Out For was more about the outside world, and I'm more interested now in the inside world, but it still feels very political. Like, if you are unable to, I mean, we learn this stuff in our families. Our families can either oppress us or free us, allow us to have our own agency and autonomy. And I was very oppressed in my family. I felt very colonized by my parents, like they just had moved into my psyche, and I had to fight a battle to get them out of there. And so that feels very political to me. And from the responses I get from other people, it's like the book sort of encourages other people as well in their own struggles for that kind of liberation. Maybe that's a little grandiose to say that that's political, but that's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Down here in the front, Susie.
Hi, Alison. I hope my question is not too abstract, but I was
I hope it is.
Well, maybe. Writing a story about your parents, is that something you can do only one time? I mean, how dangerous is it to inscribe the story in history, to do the act of writing and thereby fixing it forever?
That's a good question, because I feel like I have kind of sacrificed my own intimate memories of my parents in some ways. Once I've written them out, that becomes the record and the thing I remember. So I feel like I've lost some real connection with them. But I guess that's just part of life and loss anyhow. I mean, inevitably we lose people and we lose even our memories of them, but it was a funny thing to realize that I had actually kind of lost that closeness. I'm not sure if that's what you mean or not.
I meant that you have to, when you write about your parents and when you do psychoanalysis, of course, you write it down forever. Is that something you can go back to, like a story you wrote someday or a drawing you did someday, and then you think maybe 25 years later, maybe I have to rewrite this, maybe I have to work on it again because my perception has changed.
I think it will change, and I do still have things I want to write about my family. I don't feel quite done with them. These two books focused very narrowly on one parent, each book, but I'm also really interested in families as a unit, you know, the way that families interact, the different members. And I didn't have the skill to write about that. I feel like I've built up some skill by writing these books about each of my parents, but ultimately I would love to be able to write about my whole family. And of course that brings up all sorts of ethical issues with my brothers, like how much can I reveal about them? How willing or unwilling are they going to be subjects of yet another family memoir? But I feel like I didn't convey at all the whole picture of my family because I left out the family itself. My mother, actually, her primary relationship in life was with one of my brothers. And that feels really central. It's like a huge lie of omission in both of those books because we don't really see it. So I do feel like I hope that I get to go back and tell an even richer story. Unless my brothers kill me first.
That dismembering is looking at every single thing, individually as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In fact, I thought one of your brothers is a musician.
Yeah.
And has he, in his music, talked about himself or your family?
Not directly, no. My youngest brother is a heavy metal musician. So, indirectly.
Well, you emote a lot when you do heavy metal.
No. I'm sorry, I don't know. What else should I say about him?
D'autres questions? Ah, derrière.
I was curious just to see how is your relationship with other cartoonists? Do you have other cartoonist friends, or do you follow any contemporary stuff? Just curious.
I have, I'm not like part of a real densely knit cartoonist community. I live in the country. I don't live in the city where all the cartoonists tend to cluster. Actually, Vermont, where I live, there are a lot of...
There is a cartooning school.
Yeah, the Center for Cartoon Studies is there, and it's a 2-year cartooning program where you can get a degree, and a lot of young cartoonists are flocking to the state. So I know some of those people. Yeah, James Kochalka of American Elf. Harry Bliss is a New Yorker cover cartoonist. But I don't know. I'm very reclusive. I don't like go hang out with anyone.
That was one of the questions that I meant to ask. Is that you grew up in a house with lots of books, including books of cartoons, and with some of the cartoonists at the time that you grew up have been an influence on you, artists from Mad, for example, or the New Yorker. You show yourself, ordering, or having your father write a check to order some Mad books.
Yeah, I loved Mad magazine, and I had a subscription to it in the days when it was really good. And also, we had like some of the collections of older stuff from the 50s when it was really, really good.
And at some point you mentioned that you looked just like the little girl in the Addams Family.
Yes.
So was that also Chas Addams an early favorite?
Yeah, my parents had a couple of Addams Family books, and I loved those cartoons, and I really did get them confused with my own life. I looked just like Wednesday, and my mother looked like Morticia. It was very confusing. Once, actually, when I was in college, a girlfriend came home with me to visit my family, and she felt like she was in the Addams Family. I didn't even have to prompt her. My brother was up in the attic trying to kill a bat with a baseball bat. It was crazy. Not to mention the funeral home up the street.
Well, if there are... yes, there is another question.
Bonjour, je vais vous la poser en français parce que sinon ça va être un peu compliqué. Je voulais vous demander comment vous avez commencé à écrire Fun Home. est-ce que vous avez commencé à l'écrire pour vous, comme un journal intime, ou il y avait déjà, dès le début, cette volonté de l'exposer au public?
Very good question. I didn't begin it as a diary. I knew that I wanted to tell the story, but I also knew that I needed a certain amount of isolation with it. I gave myself a year before I even told my mother I was going to do it. I didn't seek a publisher for it. I wanted to have that kind of, just this cordon around that time to allow it to emerge without any kind of, I don't know, external forces acting on it. So it wasn't exactly a diary, but it was, I don't know, just I was very protective of that early writing. And I didn't know what I was doing either. I just started writing down memories and scenes and didn't know how they were all going to fit together. It was all very vague at the beginning.
At the same time, it's normal. I mean, when you already have maybe a publisher or even an editor, they might want to take this in a certain direction. Like at the time, it seems, but at the time that Persepolis was published in English, so maybe they would have asked you to have things sort of more dramatic.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, put a war in there.
while yes, while you basically wanted to bring a project that was already, well, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
But that was also a bit of a gamble, because if nobody had wanted it, then you would have to get a job, which brings us back to the beginning.
Yes, I'm very glad. The Fun Home saved me from having to get a job.
At least for
the present.
Yeah. So, well, maybe that's a good point to finish. Oh no, I see there two other questions, and questions pop up. There's one at the back.
I was just wondering, what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm giving myself a little break from these painful family stories. I'm giving my family a little break from these stories. And this sounds really silly when I say it out loud. I keep trying to develop a little sales pitch, but it's a book about exercise, about physical fitness. This is the only thing I have left to write about, I guess. But I've always, not always, as a kid I was not very athletic at all, but as I got older I've always loved to exercise. And I've pursued almost all of the trends that as they come along, jogging and martial arts and yoga, and that stuff has always made me really happy. So I'm going to kind of write about my own experiences, and also it will be a cultural history of exercise culture, because people in the US are so obsessed with exercise. So it'll be sort of a critique of all that. Thank you.
Oh my God. Two people had the same idea for a question at the same time. Well, then, in that case, I think we'll end it now. And thank you very much.
Thank you,
Alison.
Jean-Paul.